William, I'm glad you wanted to sit down and talk about your speaking concerns. It's something many students face, especially at advanced levels when expectations get higher. How have you been feeling about your progress so far?
I've been trying to push through it, but honestly, Professor, I still get nervous. Sometimes extremely nervous. Even after all these classes, the moment I have to speak in front of a group, I feel my heart race, my hands get shaky, and my thoughts just scatter. It's really frustrating because I know the material, but when it's time to present, I just freeze.
That's completely normal, Williams. Many students, even the most advanced ones, experience similar feelings. Public speaking anxiety is common, but it's important to remember that it's not a reflection of your abilities or intelligence. It's a skill, and like any other skill, it can be mastered with the right strategies. Let's start by exploring what exactly makes you anxious. What's going through your mind when you're up there?
I guess it's a mix of things. First, there's this overwhelming fear of judgment. I'm afraid I'll say something wrong, or my classmates and even you might think I'm not as smart as I should be at this level. Then, there's the fear of messing up. What if I forget my point? What if I stumble over my words? Sometimes I even fear that my voice will shake and people will notice.
I see. Fear of judgment and making mistakes is something that often holds people back, especially when they're speaking in front of an audience. But let's break it down. First, regarding the fear of judgment. What if I told you that most people aren't nearly as critical as we think they are? Often, they're more focused on the content of what you're saying than on the little details like minor stumbles or nerves. How would you feel if someone else in your class had a shaky voice during a presentation? Would you judge them harshly?
No, I wouldn't. In fact, I'd probably feel empathy for them, knowing how hard public speaking can be. But I guess it's harder to apply that same understanding to myself.
Exactly. It's interesting how we can be so much more critical of ourselves than we are of others. This is where we need to reframe your thinking. What if we looked at speaking not as a performance, but as a conversation, one where you're just sharing ideas with your audience rather than trying to prove something to them?
That's a good point. I've always thought of public speaking as this high-pressure test where I have to be perfect, but a conversation, that feels more natural. It makes me think that mistakes wouldn't be the end of the world.
Exactly. Think of it this way. Mistakes in speaking or any skill are opportunities for learning. No one is expecting perfection, especially when you're still refining your presentation skills. It's more important to communicate clearly and connect with your audience than to deliver everything flawlessly. The fear of making mistakes is common, but let's talk about how we can mitigate it. How do you usually prepare for your presentations?
I try to memorize everything word for word. I write out the entire speech and then practice saying it exactly as I've written. But sometimes when I'm presenting, I'll forget a sentence and then get completely thrown off track.
That's a classic trap, relying too much on memorization. It can increase anxiety because if you lose one piece of the puzzle, the whole thing feels like it's falling apart. What if, instead of memorizing, you tried focusing on the key points of your speech? Think of it as a roadmap. You don't need to know every exact word, but you should know the main stops along the way. That way, even if you lose your train of thought, you can jump back in by remembering the next point on your map. How does that approach sound?
That makes sense. If I'm just focusing on key points, there's less pressure to remember every single word. But how can I stay calm in the moment, even if I do forget a point?
There are several strategies you can use to stay calm, even if something goes off script. One of the best ways is through breathing techniques. When you're feeling anxious, your breath tends to get shallow and fast, which can heighten your feelings of panic. But if you take slow, deep breaths, it helps calm your body and mind. In fact, you can even take a deep breath during your presentation if you need a moment to gather your thoughts. The audience won't mind. It might even make you appear more composed.
I've heard about breathing exercises, but I've never tried them during a speech. Do you think it's okay to pause like that in the middle of a presentation?
Absolutely. Pausing is a powerful tool in public speaking. It gives you a moment to think, and it gives your audience a moment to digest what you've just said. Many of the best speakers use pauses to create emphasis and to control the pace of their presentations. So, never be afraid to pause and breathe. It can actually enhance your delivery.
That's good to know. I've always felt like I had to keep talking without any breaks, or people might lose interest.
On the contrary, Williams, pauses can draw your audience in. It's important to remember that when you're speaking, it's not just about getting through the material as quickly as possible. You want to engage your listeners, and pauses can create a natural rhythm that keeps them attentive. But let's talk more about preparation. Have you ever recorded yourself during practice sessions?
No, I haven't. I'm a little nervous about hearing my own voice, to be honest.
I understand that. Hearing ourselves can be uncomfortable at first, but recording yourself is one of the most effective ways to improve. When you play it back, you can hear things you might not notice in the moment. Like filler words, tone of voice, or pacing, you can also see where you're doing really well. Often we're better than we think we are. Would you be willing to give it a try?
I guess I could try it. It makes sense to hear myself so I can work on the areas that need improvement. But what if I don't like what I hear?
That's a valid concern, but remember that the goal isn't to judge yourself harshly. It's about learning and making small improvements each time. Focus on progress rather than perfection. You might notice, for example, that your pacing is off in one part, but you also might realize that your voice is strong and clear in another. And each time you practice, you'll get better.
I like the idea of focusing on progress. I've been so stuck on trying to get everything perfect that I haven't thought about celebrating the small wins. How long did it take you to feel confident as a speaker?
That's a great question. The truth is, it's an ongoing process. Even now, I still get nervous before big presentations, but over time, I've learned how to manage that nervous energy and channel it into my speaking. Confidence builds with experience, and the more you practice, the more comfortable you'll become. It's not about eliminating the fear, it's about learning how to work with it.
That's reassuring. I guess I always thought the goal was to completely get rid of the fear, but maybe I need to change my mindset. It's more about learning to manage it, right?
Exactly. Instead of trying to eliminate fear, think about transforming it into something productive. Nerves can actually give you an edge. They keep you alert and focused. Some of the best speakers harness that energy to deliver powerful presentations. The key is not letting the fear take over, but instead using it to your advantage.
That's a new way of looking at it. I've always seen fear as something negative, but if I can channel it into energy for my presentation, maybe it won't feel so overwhelming.
Precisely. Now there are also ways to practice in low-pressure environments before jumping into a full audience. Have you thought about joining a public speaking group or practicing with friends outside of class?
I've considered it, but I wasn't sure if it would help. Do you think speaking in smaller groups can really make a difference?
Absolutely. Speaking in smaller, more supportive environments can help you get comfortable with the act of speaking itself without the added pressure of a formal audience. Groups like Toastmasters or even informal gatherings with friends can provide a safe space to practice and get feedback. Over time, as you get more comfortable speaking in these settings, you'll build the confidence to speak in larger, more formal situations.
That sounds like something I'd be willing to try. I think starting small would make the process feel less intimidating.
Good. I'm glad to hear that. One final piece of advice. Remember that public speaking is not about performing perfectly. It's about connecting with your audience and conveying your message clearly. If you focus on sharing your ideas rather than being flawless, You'll find that the fear begins to fade away over time.
I'll definitely keep that in mind. Thank you so much for all your advice, Professor. I feel like I have a better approach now, and I'm ready to start practicing with these new techniques.
You're very welcome, Williams. Remember, it's a journey, not a sprint. Take it one step at a time and don't be afraid to push yourself out of your comfort zone. You'll get there.